Please also be sure to check out the sources to this video as well as the written precursor on www.bratpowr.com. A counterculture birthed from the amplified grief of disillusioned young adults, Goth is not unlike any community, subculture, or movement we've seen blossom throughout history. What often unites Goth at its core is the interest in darkness and the surreal expression of desolate themes, such as death, sorrow, and the supernatural. The loose definition we'll use for this narration is the intersection between music, sexuality, fashion, theater, horror, and self-identity. The uncanny has remained a consistent staple in Western mainstream media for centuries, from literature and fine art to costume parties and freak shows. Some of the earliest examples of horror in modern popular music include I Put a Spell on You by Screamin' Jay Hawkins and Monster Mash by Bobby Boris Pickett and the Crypt Kickers, both of whom laid the creative groundwork for campy musical horror performances. Camp is categorized by exaggeration and is the victory of style over substance. By fusing superstition and monstrous figures with a flair for dramatics, these two very different songs continue the Gothic tradition of embodying the theatrical side of horror and set the tone for what is to follow in music shortly thereafter. In the 60s and early 70s, mainstream acts across the UK and US began experimenting with darker, more avant-garde sounds. Early influences like The Doors, The Velvet Underground, The Stooges, Black Sabbath, Roxy Music, David Bowie, and The Modern Lovers would be the inspiration for underground heavy rock and proto-punk bands that were launching into the scene. Musicians fusing garage rock and punk with the global sounds of funk, reggae, Chicano rock, and the blues were ushering in a new kind of music that was youthful, brash, spirited, and confrontational. Bands such as Pure Hell, Death, Bad Brains, X-Ray Specs, The Zeros, Bags, Nervous Gender, and Los Illegals were among the first to bridge the gap between punk, the outspoken working-class 1970s counterculture, and marginalized youth across the West. Notable entertainers like Brian Eno, The Misfits, Alice Cooper, and Suicide became known for harnessing sounds ranging from solemnly atmospheric to fiercely defiant. As punk was fading into near obscurity in the UK, this spotlight on brooding aesthetics created a clear path for the emergence of a new movement to inaugurate the 80s. And in 1979, Bauhaus would do exactly that with the release of their debut single, Bela Lugosi's Dead. What separates Goth from its predecessors is its exchange of fiery and energetic rhythms for a total commitment to darker tones, with new wave influences and an excess of melodrama. Gothic music sets out to achieve haunting. Haunting plays with time, bringing the past into the present in order to make a point and represent that which is repressed or ignored. This feeling of space not only mirrors that of typical Gothic settings, but also acts in creating a void, representing emptiness, loneliness, and isolation. Originally a nickname for Andy Sexgang and fans of his band, the name Goth was popularized by UK music journalists to describe this rising sound. A title hardly seems necessary, though, as the potential of the new genre proved to be widespread early into its development, with subgenres like death rock, dark wave, cold wave, ethereal wave, and minimal wave quickly erupting into the culture. Pioneers of post-punk goth and their adjacent genres such as Joy Division, The Cramps, Susie and the Banshees, The Cure, Cocteau Twins, The Damned, Christian Death, Skeletal Family, and Sisters of Mercies were celebrated for their abilities to attract nonconformists, as well as represent the tortured, morbid, and romantic. Susie and the Banshees guitarist John Klein and the lead singer of glam and goth rock band The Specimens, Ollie Wisdom, birthed the concept of a night catered to these unique individuals. From 1982 to 1985, London nightclub Gossips held a weekly post-punk/goth club on the fourth story of the building. Dubbed the Batcave, this became a hotspot across Europe for members of the goth community to integrate within the scene and create an immersive experience for enthusiasts. Perhaps a spectacle to the average yuppie, these spaces provided a safe place to promote individualism, welcomed gender and sexual fluidity, and indulged in fetish and kink. Women also took up leading roles from early on in the goth scene as opposed to other counterculture spaces like punk and metal that were aggressively male-dominated. Conversely, goth men were offered an opportunity to be expressive, over the top and sensitive in a society that reinforced power, control, and production. To dance to a soundtrack of what's wrong in the world is to conquer those wrongings, taking control of all that is beyond control by weaving them into a dark fantasy. This supports the argument that Gothic in all its forms is driven by the simultaneous desires for escapism, truth, and meaning. Contemporary Gothic music advances Gothicism as it stratifies the desires into different elements within a single medium. The lyrics channel truth and meaning, while otherworldly sounds provide escapism, while simultaneously containing meaning within them. Cultural hubs like the Batcave, CBGBs, and Slimelight would become vital to the goth community, creating a permanent impact on this lasting movement, complete with independent record labels, magazines, as well as fashion brands and retailers dedicated to the community. Unafraid of embracing elements of the mainstream, goth was originally a blend of new wave inspirations modeled by celebrities like Grace Jones, including asymmetrical shapes, big hair, vintage jewelry, androgyny, and striking silhouettes, with punk aesthetics crafted by rebels like late fashion legend Vivienne Westwood, famous for utilizing tartan, leather, latex, chains, studs, and fishnets. As the wardrobe designer for the Sex Pistols and owner of the sex clothing boutique, Westwood's 70s shop attracted and shaped the style of frequenters such as Susie Sue and Steven Severin, who were entourage members of the iconic punk band during the 70s in a group known as the Bromley Contingent. Similarly to punk, goth fashion also had a strong emphasis on secondhand shops, DIY, and fetish wear. Like in vampiric overtones in traditional goth fashion and music, highlight thematic ties to novels of the late 18th century, which explore sexual desire, pleasure, power, and pain. This underground movement would transcend into a legacy known as the trad goth generation, paving the way for what was just the beginning of a full-blown phenomenon. The 90s is a time most remembered for its cultural depth, with music groups, entertainment spaces, TV channels, and stores all catering to different groups of people, including goths. The subculture blew up in the 90s through the 2000s with the help of music channels like MTV and VH1, as well as the popularity of retailers like Hot Topic and Spencer's. Their catalog of band merch, music, hair dye, and other alternative goods and accessories made it simple to sell the goth look as a package deal. Even today, it's almost rare not to see a Hot Topic or Spencer's in any mall in America. However, it was this widespread reach that turned longtime members of the goth community away from the scene altogether. Commodification occurs through a tripartite process of diffusion where subcultural fashions, products, and lifestyle make their way into mainstream culture. Early goths in the rebellion stage set themselves apart from the mainstream by a shared set of values and activities. In the fragmentation stage, ownership of consumer products became the signifying factor of group membership, and the values of the core goth community gave way to a temporary solidarity based on appearance, leading to commodification as the mainstream market realized the potential of goth. While most goths have gotten over their disdain for Hot Topic, it took a long time for this retailer and its shoppers to become accepted. Newer generations were developing their own look and scene that was largely disconnected from the goth community, making pure goths more difficult to identify. The easy name for this new goth would be posers, however, as we know, they were given a new title. Admittedly, it's hard for me to blame mall goths or spooky kids for the transformation the subculture had in the 90s, primarily because this decade in particular was the height of goth's popularity, but also just because I find it difficult to blame teenagers for hanging out in malls at a time when all teenagers hung out in malls. Hodkinson observed that the experience of shopping was one clear way to reiterate a subcultural identity, as Goths often dress up to go out shopping together, and any form of abuse which was received served as a rite of passage for new Goths, as well as reinvigoration of subculture commitment for established Goths. Goths also consumed through experience by attendance at social events, which facilitated a public subcultural participation and provided a space for collective consumption, appreciation of shared tastes, and competitive sharing of subcultural styles. The appearance, behavior, and attention of Goths at social events were so important that Goths could be regarded as consuming one another, as the crowd created both consumers and producers of the experience. Still, the general skepticism surrounding these retailers and fast fashion brands is whether or not they give back, support, or advance the Goth community in any way, and these are all valid questions that should be asked. Are Goths able to support other creative Goths by purchasing these goods, or are they being marketed to by companies who understand consumers willing to spend a high amount to achieve an alternative look? And is it the immersive experience that Goth culture provides that makes its fans the perfect consumers, or is it just a byproduct of the subculture becoming more mainstream? Now, I don't want to get too carried away talking about the commodification of Goth without describing to you what a real Goth may have looked like at this time. Goth styles diversified tenfold during the 90s, with heavy emphasis on period dress like the Middle Ages and influences from the mourning fashions during the Victorian and Edwardian eras. These included softer feminine details and delicate fabrics such as satin, crushed velvet, and vintage lace, crafted into tailcoats, dramatic sleeves, and high-necked collared blouses, capes, and nightwear. Personalizations were made using accessories such as top hats, pinned-up curls, and bondage gear to maximize the look. Famous stores like New York's Trash and Vaudeville and leading brands such as 60s, Morbid Threads, Jenny Nitro, Begotten, and the then emerging Trip NYC and Lip Service were all essential pieces for the Goth shopper, and some even managed to maintain a legacy role for being part of constructing alternative fashion. Simultaneously, the Goth media landscape was flourishing, with magazines like Gothic Beauty, Permission, Dark Realms, Carpe Noctem, and Gothica offering a platform for music reviews, captivating fashion spreads, poetry, artwork, and insightful essays, all created by and for the Goth community. And as much as I love the trad Goth era, I feel like the reason 90s Goth was able to resonate so deeply with people, both at the time and in present day, has more to do with the creative harmony the genre was able to achieve during this time, and less to do with nostalgia, like I think a lot of people would probably believe. It's when Goth's connection to historical art was at its strongest, and there's a lot of cohesion that I really appreciate. I'm not well versed in art history in this way, so please don't assume any expertise on my part, but I know I love me some Baroque, and I love me some Rococo, and that's exactly what a lot of 90s Gothic artwork gives, like these Carpe Noctem magazine covers, which are so stunning. I'll leave the link for these in the sources on our site if you want to take a look. I strongly encourage you to. There's a lot more and they're all beautiful. Even with the culture blossoming to new heights, there was still looming anxiety and strong rejection towards mall goths and some of the other subgroups at the time, like cybergoths and steampunks, who began to blur the lines of what exactly a goth could be. This shows that some people who consider themselves goths do not define Gothic in terms of style or atmosphere, but in terms of a strict set of subcultural conventions. Gothic in all its mediums is categorized by its breaking of boundaries, so purism surely has no place in it. While blue-check Goths continued to expand the culture, more stark changes were introduced by outcasts of the community. Mall Goths were infamous for their use of bold color combinations, colored contacts, stripes, demonia boots, thick dog collars, trip pants, faux locks, and style inspiration from icons like Amy Lee and Guy Fieri. This was not, however, considered an authentic look in the 90s and 2000s. There's always been a lot of variation in goth style, but mall goths were very disconnected from blue-check goths in terms of taste in music, social rituals, and fashion. If you take a close look at 80s goths, you can see how their style set the foundation for the different aesthetics developed by blue check goths in the 90s and still exist today. Goth style was categorized from the beginning by black backcombed hair and distinctively styled heavy dark makeup, accentuating the eyes, cheekbones, and lips. You can't track their origins back to 80s goths as easily as you can 90s blue check goths and their various subgroups. For example, aside from trad goths, gothabilis and perky goths have probably existed the longest and still exist today. This is a wild guess, but you probably have perky goths to thank for pastel goths and other similar aesthetics. Vampire goths were always present. There were some 80s goths literally dressed exactly like Stevie Nicks and Janis Joplin, very much pregnant with hippie goth, whimsy goth, dare I even say a little bit of dark cabaret whenever Stevie Nicks has her top hat on, like for a quick little chuckle. Like, I'm aware that I'm crossing into new territory with that one, but over time, with goth being at the height of its popularity, it's only natural for people to lean more heavily into certain styles that they identify with more, making these at once smaller aesthetics a lot more prominent and increasing the number of subgenres within the goth scene. And at a certain point, these can all morph into things that are so far removed from goth that they become their own entity. I'm not arguing that it has to be labeled as goth or labeled anything at all, but where it derives from is indisputable. In all fairness, there was a lot of valid concern goths felt over how they were being represented at this time and legitimate reasons for their severe impulse to gatekeep. Direct retellings from 90s goths emphasize how they were heavily bullied due to negative stereotyping and their extreme wardrobe. To make matters worse, mall goths were known to hiss, growl, or find other ways to be aggressively combative or purposefully intimidating towards normies. With abuse towards goths being so frequent, public harassment became an easy crutch for quote-unquote goths who were made to feel alienated for their forms of self-expression, even if they aren't even truly considered goths by a majority of the community. Already prey to ridiculing segments on daytime news and talk shows since the 80s, this escalated after the Columbine massacre falsely associated goths with violence and demonic forms of worship. This happened to also coincide with the rise of mall goths, who were known to be fans of entertainers who pushed moral boundaries, relied on shock, and generated the most outrage from the public. This created further complications in the goth community, as their intrusions and poor reputation interfered with delivering the escapism that's essential to goth success. Fans of industrial or nu metal artists like Marilyn Manson, Slipknot, Korn, Insane Clown Posse, Rammstein, and Cradle of Filth continued to be firmly exiled by the goth community at this time for having no true association with the culture. However, despite these communities having no ties to each other, it did not stop the media from labeling them and the Columbine mass murderers as goths. This would only increase the blue check goths' focus on authenticity and policing newer generations' lack of depth or knowledge of goths' roots, particularly concerning music. Gothic-derived artwork has received fairly consistent attention throughout Western history for the last few hundred years, but still goths of the 90s found themselves at war with the general public. Goths are interested and sensitive about how they are pictured in the media. Even if they did not watch TV or read the papers, they still believe that the representation would be or is unfavorable for them. This may be a generalization on their part, or just an extrapolation of past experiences. Some of the comments participants mention on the topic say that the representation is too simple, not literate / focuses on extremes, particularly appearance, includes hostile religious elements, superficial, gross caricature, shows goths as outcasts, inaccurate because they do not know what goth exactly means, or overly dramatic. While early pop portrayals of gothic figures like the Addams Family, the Munsters, Elvira, or Tim Burton characters often presented them in a harmlessly comedic or campy manner, many depictions of the goth culture rely on shallow characteristics such as dark clothing, pessimism, and interest in the paranormal, while neglecting the musical and cultural aspects of the subculture. A common trope in the media is to portray goth as a temporary phase, often associated with rebellion or teenage angst. And while teen angst is certainly a gender-neutral experience, goths have made note of an overrepresentation of goth girls in media, often to highlight an isolated character struggling with their identity and mental health, to lean into pagan aesthetics, or even highlight female sexuality by utilizing the vamp trope, while goth guys are typically underrepresented or portrayed in extreme ways. Extremely hot ways. From modern gothic depictions such as the Addams Family to Lydia from Beetlejuice, the debate over which on-screen characters can truly be identified as goth versus gothic and otherwise has been a prolonged one. While I'm not advocating for Tim Burton or Invader Zim characters to be categorized as goth, the impression I've gotten is that goth representation should follow an indisputable set of criteria, which I think could easily come off as exclusionary or reductionist. Still, the media does often conflate terms like goth and gothic, leading to confusion between different countercultures and blatantly inaccurate portrayals. However, compared to the outright negative depictions, even diluted portrayals offer a potential positive for gothic representation. Portrayals of goths in the media have also since evolved, and they'll continue to advance, hopefully, as more goths enter the industry themselves to support in shaping public perception of the community. Ultimately, it's accurate and nuanced portrayals of goth that are crucial for promoting an accurate understanding of the crux of goth culture. And if I'm being honest, I think for representation to be nuanced, it has to be a little cliche at times. So perhaps instead of outright rejecting these portrayals of goth, it's okay to acknowledge that in the context of when these came out, they may have still contributed to the insane hype that the culture had during this time. From Hot Topics to Jack Skellington, there's a lot of tension between individual expression and community standards in the goth culture. As the community grows more unfamiliar with its roots, newer generations seem to be more concerned with how to appear or seemingly fit in with other goths, rather than questioning what it means to be a goth from an ideological standpoint. Whereas original goths had more of an emphasis on originality over conformity, veteran goths have critiqued goths of today for not having as much grit and opting for a more cookie-cutter or perfect look, and I agree. There's not really a pretty ugly element to goth compared to the 80s, and this makes sense given our current attachment to social media. When your interaction to, or the bulk of your engagement with a so-called counterculture is online and exclusively features these polished, perfect examples of goth with glamorous makeup and a seemingly endless closet full of retailed alternative fashion, then it's going to be difficult to challenge what is now the new status quo. So then the question becomes, how does one counterculture a counterculture? Compared to punk's working class roots, goth seems to have a less unified political ideology and more so centers moodiness, romance, and provocativeness, which creates larger issues regarding inclusivity as the subculture grows and becomes more accessible over the decades. This isn't to say that goth bands didn't write meaningful lyrics with political elements to them. A survey of over 100 goth albums from the 1980s reveals that goth music typically focused on the following topics: surreal nightmares, the banality of urban living, jealousy and obsessive emotions, romantic love as salvation from death and despair, war and genocide, nuclear holocaust, fear of totalitarianism, alienation and enemy, abstract terror, scenes of murder and horror from a voyeuristic perspective, fear of technology, the Foucaultian over-surveillance of society, and lampooning masculine power. Although these themes are dark because they are negative and imply pain, suffering, and danger, this shows that the subject of most goth music is contrary to the popularly held belief that the genre purely revolves around fantasy, the self, and is completely apolitical. We've already discussed how the original goths came to be at a time of political unrest, so none of this should be of any surprise. Despite this, there is also historical truth that the goth community can be complacent about questionable acts committed by goth idols. Collectively, the message being sent is that the most important aspect of goth is style rather than meaning or intent, and it's this lack of unified thought in goth culture that creates the ideal climate for intruders. People who take on alternative aesthetics but do harm within their communities shouldn't be uncommon or shocking anymore. Echoing goth YouTuber Shanalika, it also doesn't help to tell people whose ideas you disagree with that they are simply not goth, even if they are intolerant, hateful, or dangerous, because unfortunately it does nothing to stop or prevent these individuals from engaging in other networks. These individuals are still fully capable of presenting as goth, enjoying goth music at their leisure, and finding alliances in other places that are more tolerant of their views and/or behaviors. Another rudiment of the goth subculture that can get quite ambiguous is its traditional association with embracing BDSM, fetishism, and kink, opening the door to complex issues including those of age of consent, grooming, and sexual exploitation. One notable issue that has made its way into the mainstream is the hypersexualization of goth girls. Whereas goth men were allowed to explore androgyny in their fashion, the case wasn't the same for goth girls. The androgynous appearance of males presents a paradox as their feminized style functions as a display of masculinity, affirming traditional male values such as courage, confidence, and sexual prowess. Conversely, female androgyny is strongly discouraged and can lead to a loss of subcultural status. Brill suggests that two alternative routes to subcultural capital for women are hyperfeminine attire and displays of bisexuality, both of which are associated with power and control for some female goths. In addition to these restrictions, there was also a certain amount of pressure from within the goth community to be sexually open. Being a prude wasn't cool, and instead being open to sexual taboos rewarded goths with social currency even at a young age. With goth girls being seen as leaders in the scene and there being expectations to follow a specific appearance, this also came with a lot of internalized pressures and expectations to be the hottest, gothiest girl at the club, as well as sexually mature beyond her years. Although this may have only complicated the now widespread eroticization of goth girls, it isn't something that happened overnight on TikTok. While young goth girls on social media have their own battles with porn-addicted, teenaged, often non-goth boys with unregulated internet access, goth women have also described the sexual objectification and abuse that they collectively faced in the 90s as teenagers. Angela Benedict recalled in one video a group of boys who would spunk into cups and assault goth girls at school by throwing them at them. Sadly, violence was not uncommon from members within the goth community as well, with some goths going as far as to suggest that the community provided the perfect climate for these individuals to flourish. The rise of spooky kids and the oversaturation of nu metal fans in the goth scene brought an aggressive temperament along with it that wasn't native to goth culture. Although fans of these groups were initially rejected by the goth community, there are also plenty of goths today who started with these bands and have since extended their interest to traditional goth music as well, or vice versa, fans of traditional goth becoming interested in these artists, thus earning them acceptance and a proper place within the goth community today, so long as it is understood that these particular musicians do not make goth music. The collective acceptance of artists who utilize shock value, aggression, taboo, and moral blurring has also come with its consequences, as the attitude of their fans clashed with that of traditional goths. Reflecting on incidents like the sexual assaults committed by audience members during Limp Bizkit's and Korn sets at Woodstock 99, and crimes carried out by artists like Marilyn Manson, the alternative scene's general tendencies to overlook what's under their nose hasn't served the community well in maintaining the inclusive environment for forward thinkers that it once was. By the 2010s, changes in the goth community could even be seen on a small scale, as L. Bush observes the appearances of goth men at a music festival, stating, "Feminine forms of clothing and extensive makeup on men were far less prevalent, while traditional masculine features such as goatees and shorter hair had become commonplace." Albeit by the 2010s, a lot more had occurred to contribute to these changes other than fans of nu metal injecting the community with masculine fashion influences. However, one could certainly argue that it was likely a contributing factor. When considering how far is too far when it comes to dark personas and certain imagery used by entertainers in the goth scene, the same question should be extended when discussing the usage of Nazi and fascist symbolism throughout goth, punk, and metal communities. A common act meant to defy and strip the symbolism of its power, goths of color in particular question whether a community that relies on these aesthetics so heavily is self-driven enough to keep the environment safe enough for them to actually stick around. Instead, people of color share personal experiences of white goths being more interested in credential checking them for showing an interest in goth culture, which can gradually affect their sense of belonging. Goth rock bands have been unafraid of exploring influences from Latin, Caribbean, Native American, and Arab cultures to capture unconventional and surrealist visuals and sounds, including bands like Bauhaus utilizing reggae-inspired echo and reverb, as well as vocal mixing techniques in their songs. Despite the continued exclusion of people of color's influence from within the goth scene, racialized individuals have always been at the forefront of fundamental points of counterculture histories. The Philadelphian all-black punk band Pure Hell toured in the UK with Sid Vicious, a large influence on goth idols who came out of the Bromley contingent in the 70s. Lead vocalist of Pure Hell, Kenny Stinker Gordon, has stated that he doesn't want to be remembered just because they were black, and sees the band as a pioneering influence on the punk movement in the 70s. Further problems present themselves when material and aesthetic interests are prioritized in favor of social interest. Because this has become the norm in the community, it's easy to fall into a routine of remaining blissfully unaware of how to actively combat this and make the community more inclusive. Andy Anderson was the drummer for The Cure from 1983 to 84, and he was fired in October 1984 for trashing a hotel room. I'm not going to lie. For a rock star, this story sounded completely off to me. And for a while I couldn't find any information on the supposed events that occurred on this tour, which incited the entire incident. Though I'm still not able to find a lot of information on what caused Anderson to be fired while in Japan, I did find what appears to be a very old fan site for The Cure. And on it is an August 1984 tour diary article from a German magazine during Anderson's time on tour with the band. This article details the following, and again, this will be linked with our list of sources, which you can find on our website. At 9 o'clock, dreaming is over as there's a madman raving at the corridor, hammering at the door like crazy and screaming, "Come out or I'll kill you," over and over again. I drag myself and my morning hangover to the door. There's Andy Anderson, the colored drummer, in front of a room door, a full bottle of Perrier in his right hand, and in the left one a metal coffee pot, banging that one against the wooden door like mad. I try to calm him down without any success. Meanwhile, someone called the police. Slowly Andy calms down, slips the bottle and pot to the floor, and all of a sudden there's nothing but the picture of misery. Suddenly the corridor is full of gapers. The cops, of course, are not interested in explanations. Unceremoniously, they take Andy with them. What happened is as follows. Towards 8:30 in the morning, Andy, in not a very good mood, strolls around the hotel trying to find someone who would go to the beach with him. As a result, he runs into the hotel-owned security men who immediately want to know who the hell he was and what he was doing there. Andy, the only black man in the hotel, shows his room key. Well, it could have been stolen after all. The nice men now want to have a look at his papers. Andy goes to his room, pulls his passport out of the suitcase and turns around at the two watchdogs. At this moment, completely out of the blue, one of them blows a juicy load of tear gas into his face. Andy goes mad. Temporarily blind, he chases after the uniformed guys and plants himself in front of the door he expects the friendly men to be behind. But it's the wrong door. In the aforementioned room, the wife of a French film producer spends the night. To top it all, she's related to the mayor of Nice. The hotel managers frown and say some unmoved that Andy wouldn't get out of jail at least for the next 48 hours, but our next gig was waiting to be done the following day. The French tour promoter tries to pull a few strings while I go on an apology tour. 8 hours of talking to the maid, hotel authorities, and police till I won the general manager of the hotel over to my side. A bill for the emerged damages is presented to me and make me promise to pick up Andy right at the prison cell and get him right into the bus. A reunion wouldn't be welcome. There are also some segments from the 2023 book by Simon Price, Curepedia, The A to Z of the Cure, supporting that racism was likely a major role in Andy's departure with the band. As a black musician in the overwhelmingly white world of alternative rock, there is no question that Anderson encountered obstacles. Robert Smith has acknowledged that similar factors may have played into Anderson's meltdown in Japan. There was definitely some issues with racism, Smith told Mojo. We were sort of oblivious to it. According to the book, upon being let go, Anderson reportedly told someone, "I respect you. You're the only one who's dared to come and see me." Of course, I can't see who exactly this is about. I didn't buy the book, but I can certainly imagine this being an isolating experience for a black man during the 80s, and that line just kind of broke my heart to see. Anderson unfortunately fell ill with stage 4 terminal cancer, announcing on Facebook, "No boo-hooing here. For me, it's just another life experience and hurdle that one has to make," and sadly passed away in February 2019. Anderson spoke respectfully of The Cure after his departure, so I don't want to speak for anyone. My personal thoughts are just this. I've heard a lot of older black folk who talk very similar to Anderson. They don't complain, they take it on the chin and move on with their lives. However, situations like this are painting a different story, and it's pointing to a history of this that I wish was talked about more, because getting fired for being a victim of profiling and being tear gassed in the hotel that you're meant to be staying at while on tour in Europe is bullshit. It's not punk, it's not rock and roll, it's bullshit, and things like this should be aired out. Similarly to the musical influences of black and brown cultures on goth aesthetics, the community is especially keen on borrowing iconography from different cultures and religions to emphasize an exotic, bizarre, and otherworldly look. This can be seen in popular goth fashion choices such as dreads and cyberlocks, box braids, bantu knots, feather headdresses, onks, sugar skull makeup, and more. All the while, racialized goths face regular challenges booking modeling jobs in goth magazines. Rather, white goths are used more frequently and in some cases to model aesthetics influenced by black and brown cultures, reinforcing the idea that racialized people do not fit in and cannot achieve the goth look in the same way people of fairer complexions can. I mean, God forbid someone even observe how similar hairstyles in goth magazines are to styles in 90s black hair magazines. And it's never to draw some larger conclusion about goths stealing from black magazines. When black girls are referencing goth looks and bringing to the forefront artists like Foxy Brown, Aaliyah, Left Eye, it's not because anyone is arguing that these were goth rock entertainers. Goth is unafraid of its influence from pop culture, and at the same time, black influence can't be removed from pop culture. It's not a conversation about appropriation, it's about creative influence. But the perpetual dismissal of this influence, which is a microaggression, has a trickle-down effect. resulting in more negative experiences, including the imbalanced pressures on racialized Goths to prove their identities and meet or go beyond stylistic requirements to be accepted within the scene. In a conversation with Vlad von Skitcht, Shawnalika told her audience that it wasn't until another racialized Goth acknowledged them as a Goth as well for them to officially claim the title, because no one had ever given them that same validation. People of color have long proven to be both fans and pioneers of rock and counterculture scenes. Though social media has made Goth more accessible for better or for worse, and widened its exposure to different people outside of the community, it's still almost shocking for some people to understand our active involvement in alternative scenes. Theories of the collective unconscious suggest that there is a unified human experience that dates back to the beginning of time. This means that regardless of our culture or upbringing, there are instincts and archetypes in the collective unconscious that spans humanity. Gothic often seeks to expose our anxieties or vulnerabilities, and these are often premortal. We all have the same fears deep down. They can't be learned or forgotten, and they are out of our control. Gothic also seeks truth. And that which is reflected by our unified human experience is more true and real than any of the artificialities of modern-day life. If Gothic can be rooted back to a premortal level, this could explain why aspects of it repeatedly manifest themselves throughout history and independently across national borders. In conclusion, Goth is a musical and cultural language that has also achieved a multicultural reach. That's how we see global movements inspired by goth, glam, and metal, like Visual Kai in Japan, led by groups like Z-Kill, Bucktick, Penicillin, and Malice Miser. Since then, there has been an excessive development in Western interests in Japanese interpretations of goth fashion, like Gothic Lolita. Goth is known for its give and take. It should be allowed to stay open-minded and inclusive to remain cohesive. If you've made it this far, I just wanted to stop and thank you so much for getting into this new series where we'll be narrating the histories and evolutions for a number of different rock-based subcultures. So be sure to visit us online at www.bratpowr.com, hit that like and subscribe button, and let's get this wrapped up with just a few final thoughts. While for better or for worse, social media and music streaming have increased Goth's accessibility, it's also resulted in added tension surrounding quote-unquote goth purity culture and policing. Long ago, there may have been a time when the last people on Earth who Goths wanted to be associated with were emos, due to the humiliating shadow that they cast on goth culture, similarly to mall goths of the 90s. Present-day Goths seem to be more concerned with a myriad of online discourses, ranging from what specific bands and songs are even considered goth, to the rapid trend cycles that are perpetuated by platforms like TikTok. The fascination with goths on social media has unquestionably aided in the transformation of what was once an underground movement to become suitable for mass consumption. However, I don't think it's a good enough excuse for subcultures to be vehemently resistant to every new change that's introduced to the alternative scene. One of the most contradictory things about the goth scene is the hierarchy that some try to give it. Coddington has termed this gother-than-thou syndrome. This is similar to the way that literary critics argued that only early Gothic literature was truly Gothic, in the same sense that some veterans of the scene argued that only those who were Goth at the beginning of the 80s were truly Goth. It's because of Gothic's opposition to boundaries that the scene has evolved so much and therefore changed. What these veterans see as real is no longer there, as it has changed so much. When the real is no longer what it used to be, nostalgia assumes its full meaning. There's a proliferation of myths of origin and signs of reality, of secondhand truth, objectivity, and authenticity. This means that what it actually means to be a Goth gets forgotten, and what these veterans see as authentic is based on nostalgia and how things were back then, forgetting why things were back then. If the reason why were remembered, then it would be remembered that Gothic was against boundaries and the evolution of its music and scene is natural. People who blame TikTok for every problem in the goth community sound just as delusional to me as goths who blamed everything on mall goths. And more than anything else, you sound like an old geezer. I can agree that TikTok is a breeding ground for misinformation, micro-trends, and outrage, making it the perfect place for newer members to make attempts at rewriting history before they have an in-depth understanding of the culture. But one could also easily argue that this is simply a rite of passage, a byproduct of being 15, discovering eyeliner, and thinking you know everything. And I think it's okay to admit that every alternative subculture goes through the same cycle as time goes on. It's normal. Goth is an integral part of pop culture. In my opinion, the two cannot be separated, and it's proven long ago to be here to stay. As goth culture continues to thrive as a space for the exploration of personal identity and artistic experimentation, I hope to continue seeing baby bats be encouraged to go beyond any preconceived standards they may have from social media, conforming to just one singular goth look, or even limiting their music libraries to only goth-based music genres. I was so happy to hear from goths who understood that limiting oneself to only goth activities, goth friends, and goth forms of entertainment is missing the point of being an individual. I certainly experienced that as a teenager in my alternative scene, and it made me leave, so I don't want that for newer generations. I have so much more to talk about. We're gonna get into emo, we're gonna get into indie. A lot of indie sleaze talk from people born in 03. What's with that? I'm gonna lose it. Again, please check out the written precursor to this video. You can also see our list of sources on www.bratpowr.com. Hit that subscribe button. We're new here. Hit subscribe, leave a comment with some of your favorite goth bands. Like I said, Cocteau Twins is definitely in my top 10 favorite bands all time. And if they're not considered goth, please don't correct me. I don't have the strength. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Stay tuned, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.